Welcome back to class. Today we'll talk about functional behavior assessment. You know, all behaviors are learned and maintained through interaction with the social and physical environment. We will talk about this in week 5, but these behavior environment interactions are described as positive or negative reinforcement contingencies. So FBA, functional behavior assessment, enables hypotheses about the relations among specific types of environmental events and behaviors. FBA is also designed to obtain information about the purposes we called functions a behavior serves for a person. So for your final project, I know you already find a person with disability, right? So we are going to try this FBA. You will complete FBA and then you will develop BIP and you will deliver a intervention from your BIP you developed for the person. Alrighty, so generally we say there are two functions of behaviors, possible functions, to get something or to avoid something. But when we say four functions, four purposes, then we say it. Escape, attention, tangible, or sensory like physical stimulation. The main purpose of doing FBA is to identify the purpose of behaviors, and it will help us to design appropriate intervention for the individual. By doing FBA, you can define the topography of the behavior, means the form of behavior, how the behavior looks like. You can also collect data to identify setting events, antecedents, and consequence of the behavior. You can predict when the behavior will and will not occur. You can also assess students' functional communication and the communication mode. You can also identify the student's preference. FBA tells us when the behavior occurs, how the behavior looks like, and why the behavior occurs. Let's talk about some of the important terms before we move on. So setting events are the conditions that increase the likelihood a behavior will occur. So for example, a student did not have enough sleep last night, or the student did not have breakfast in the morning. Then those kind of physical conditions will affect the student's routine and physical condition throughout the day. Antecedents tell us what happened right before a challenging behavior. So by having consistent, repeated observation, you can figure out the patterns of A and B, between A and B. So you can prevent the challenging behavior from occurring. For example, a person just walked into the room and my students start to scream. Then the person's presence is the antecedent stimulus that make my student scream, right? So by having consistent multiple observation, you can kind of figure out the patterns of between A and B, so you can prevent the problem behavior from occurring. Here is the general procedures for FBA and BIP. After you gather information about challenging behavior using interview, rating scale, ABC analysis, or scatter plot, you can come up with summary statement. That's called hypothesis, right? And you have to test your hypothesis to see your statement is true. And then, based on the information, you will develop BIP. FBA methods can be classified into 3 types: functional analysis, descriptive assessment, and indirect assessment. Functional analysis is a good one, but it's frequently used in research, so we are not going to talk about these. We will use descriptive assessment and indirect assessment. So indirect information can be gathered through interview and rating scale. And in direct observation include ABC analysis and scatter plot. Let's talk about the interview. The goal of a behavioral interview is to obtain clear and objective information about the problem behaviors, antecedents, and consequences. This might include clarifying description of the behavior, when, where, with whom, and how often it occurs, what typically precedes the behavior, what the child and others typically do immediately following the behavior, and what steps have previously been taken to address the problem behavior, and with what result. We are going to use the shortened version of functional assessment interview form developed by O'Neill. So it's online, you can download, use it. I will explain how to use the form when you have to turn in your final project. So this is direct observation, ABC analysis. So you will do multiple ABC observations. So you will figure out antecedents and consequence of the behavior. And the result patterns provide information regarding typical antecedents to behavior, typical consequences for behavior, and the result of those consequences on behavior. This is an example of ABC narrative recording. You will collect data when behaviors of interest, your target behaviors, are observed, and recording is open-ended. So you can record whenever you see the target behavior, then you will record the time, what happened right before the target behavior, and what happened right after the target behavior. So you will do multiple observations and you will figure out ABC patterns. So this is the example of the ABC narrative recording. This is another example of ABC observation. You can modify the ABC form as you need for your convenience. So this teacher especially specify the location where the target problem behavior happened, right? And then this teacher had multiple ABC observations and then defined the function of the behavior. We use ABC chart a lot because it tells us what the student is doing that is inappropriate and the frequency of target behavior, and it also tells us antecedents and consequences. So it's convenient, so we want to use this. Now, based on the information you gather from ABC chart or interview or scatter plot and rating scale, other sources too, you will develop summary statements and hypotheses. So basically, you can summarize when the behavior occurs, what kind of behavior occurs, what happens after the behavior. If you can identify the possible function for each event, that would be great too. So now you will write the hypothesis statements, which is the conclusion statements. After you have multiple observations and using other source, you'll be able to figure out the ABC patterns, right? So in your hypothesis statements, as you see in this figure, you will include ABC plus the possible function you figured out. So for example, in this figure, when Tanisha is prompted to wash her hands in preparation for lunch, she screams and tantrums, which is followed by termination of hand washing and lunch by being sent to timeout. And the possible function in this case was to escape from hand washing or lunch, right? So for your hypothesis statements, you will include A, B, C plus the possible function you figure out in one sentence. Once you develop your hypothesis summary statement, you want to test if the statement is true, because your statement is from your subjective observations or interview data. So we want to confirm that the summary statement and hypothesis is reoccurring and it is true. There are several ways to do it, but in the real life, as a teacher practitioner, you can conduct additional observations to accumulate data showing a clear pattern of the antecedent behavior and consequences you identified. So you will see if the ABC is reoccurring over and over and over to confirm your hypothesis. Another way to test your hypothesis is to do functional analysis. So by simply saying you will manipulate the antecedent variable and consequence variable you identify to determine if your hypothesis about the function and predictor of the behavior is correct. So you will change the antecedent variable, alter the variables and conditions, and see that if when you change and alter antecedent variable or consequence variable, you will see if the B behavior is still occurring in the same way or similar way. If not, then your ABC contingency you identify is not true, right? So you will manipulate A and C stimulus, the variable, to see if your ABC, your identify ABC, is true. Now you know that your ABC and the function you identify is true by testing. Then you will develop intervention. It's called behavior intervention plan. So once you finish FBA, then you will develop BIP, behavior intervention plan. This includes antecedent setting events intervention, behavior teaching, and consequence-based strategy. So you will identify several intervention strategy under A, B, and C, which means you can alter antecedent variables, so you can see that you can prevent the problem behavior from occurring. You can also alter consequence variable, and you can directly teach alternative but appropriate behavior. So you don't want to see problem behavior from occurring. When you develop an intervention, remember that FBA does not identify the intervention strategy for you. It does provide information why the behavior occurred, the function only. However, it does provide information about powerful reinforcers you can use when you develop intervention, because you know the consequence of the behavior, what is reinforcing the behavior, right? When you choose an intervention, the intervention must match the function of problem behavior. For example, if the function of problem behavior is to escape from the situation or the task, then the intervention should provide escape for alternative behavior. You will teach the alternate behavior, but the intervention, the alternate behavior should allow the person to escape from the situation. Or you can alter test demands, so you can delay escape a little bit, but eventually the child can escape from the situation. Another example is if the problem behavior, the function of problem behavior is to gain something, then the intervention you choose should provide the desired outcome. So by doing the alternate behavior you will be teaching to the student should be able to gain the thing he wants. Or you can alter antecedent condition to make attention or tangible less reinforcing, which means if by changing the antecedent condition, the value of consequence, the reinforcer decreases. We will talk about this later. Now, let's talk about your practicum report. This week, you have to turn in your practicum report, step 1. Like I said before, you will choose one student or individual or child with disability or behavioral issues. So you will work with the person throughout the semester. You will conduct FBA and you will develop BIP and you will implement a behavior intervention for the person. So you can use your connections or you can use your current workplace, school, daycare, rehab center, community-based center or home-based center. Wherever you work or wherever you have connections, you will find a person with disability. There will be no required hour for this class. You will just meet the person and you will complete this project. So you will meet the person enough to finish this project. So let's talk about step 1. After you identify a person to work with for this project, in step 1, you will provide brief demographic information about your student or client, such as age, school, or family information. Then you will do brief observations of the student, then provide a description of a target behavior, a problem behavior you want to focus on throughout this project, and you'll talk about the problem behavior. So what the behavior looks like. So you'll provide clear topography of the problem behavior. Then you can briefly talk about the setting. If you're working at school, you can talk about the classroom. If you're working at clinic, then you can talk about the clinic, like what kind of activities are going on, such things. It is just 2 pages limits, and it will be worth for 10 points. Please do not use student's real name.